All right, and hello. Thank you for joining us today. You are attending Building Adaptive Fulfillment Networks for Increased Resiliency and Efficiencies. We're so happy that you're here, and we have a lot of good content today. We're going to get right into it, but first wanted to let you know about a few housekeeping items. We do have two handouts you can download today. In the GoToWebinar widget, please see the handout section where you can download the slides that we're going to show you, and also there's another PDF that links to all the content and assets that we are mentioning. So be sure to check that out before you leave or the end of the webinar. For those that are here now and those that are registered, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you within 24 hours. Just a note, we are not sharing to the public these recordings for the entire series until sometime after the final webinar wraps up at the end of this month. But just note that you will be getting a recording emailed to you after this one. At the end of this webinar, we will be doing a live Q&A. If you have any questions, please input the questions into the questions widget in the GoToWebinar platform. If we don't get to your questions live, someone will be following up with your question after the webinar ends. So if you do have any questions, be sure to get those in and someone will be following up with you. As mentioned, we're on the third webinar today of four. If you have joined us in previous webinars, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome and thank you for joining us. Use the link on the screen and you can actually register for the last webinar in the series that's coming up on September 30th, titled Enhancing Personnel Safety, Site Security, and Continuity. So looking forward to wrapping this up and joining us on the last one. With that, today's presenters are Cindy Elliott, who is the Director of Business, Industry Sector, and Corporate Sustainability Lead here at Esri. And you'll be hearing also from Mike Fry, who is a Senior Solutions Engineer at Esri, to go over some of the demos. With that, Cindy, I'll pass it on to you.
Great, Ryan, thank you so much, and thank you everybody for joining us today. I'm excited about being here with Mike Fry. You'll hear from him a bit today, and really tackling an interesting topic that is really taking industry at large kind of over right now, and that's the ability and the understanding of adapting your fulfillment networks for that increased resiliency and efficiencies. And before we get started in that particular topic, I want to kind of share with this audience kind of the spectrum of ways that companies and industry are bringing spatial intelligence, location intelligence, and data into their organizations for overall supply network and logistics resilience. And the very first, we see here the digitizing the supply network and flow of goods. And, leading up to COVID and especially after COVID had such a big impact across our global supply chains, we really saw a surge in adoption of GIS to visualize and understand where all assets are on throughout the network, globally, regionally, whether that was a factory, a supplier, including even distribution nodes for third-party providers and such. So just really essential to get that digital visual and understanding and context of where everything is, not just dots on a map, but more data about underlying the context of that location. You can see here in the handout that Ryan recommended, there's a handout with all the links of all the materials that I reference in the slides today. So you can go and interact directly with this story map. But just a very simple way that Timberland now is creating beyond resiliency from a risk perspective, but more about transparency and sustainability resilience, showing how the materials are sourced, the labor in these areas as it relates to their yellow boot. And we're seeing more and more of an emergence of this on that transparency. And on the bottom screen, you see a quick thumbnail of what we refer to as digital network dependencies. And this is actually following the flow of goods throughout the ecosystem and being able to monitor where things are in that. The second part of this transaction, or the idea of continuing evolving this resilience story, is adopting real-time situational awareness and risk assessment. And bringing in now real-time feeds. These might be real-time feeds from your own network, from your own systems, location of goods, location of assets moving or stationary, but putting them in context with other external real-time feeds, whether that's risk analytics and risk feeds from external sources, real-time traffic, real-time weather, being able to bring this all in and layer those onto your digital network now and see where is risk imminent, like now. And what we see here is an article from Texas Monthly early in COVID as HEB tracked and monitored kind of their global supply network and the impact it was going to have on their local trade areas early in the pandemic. And then the second story here is that not only is data and situational awareness important for today's operations, but the story here in the white paper from AT&T on the impact and threat of sea level rise as it relates to their ultimate infrastructure across the country. And a really good story. So you're looking at real time right now risk and assessments, and then over time related to climate change and other ultimate risk. And then the ability, with all this understanding and intelligence, being able to optimize logistics and fleet operations, looking at routing optimization, looking at yard management and inspection management, and all these things that are kind of getting the building up your real-time view or your holistic view, single pane of glass, and planning for all of your operations. And what I would say here in particular, what you see is the UPS being awarded at Esri user conference a few years back, the President's Award, just the phenomenal efficiency gains, the phenomenal impacts they had within their operations of infusing their delivery planning and route planning with spatial intelligence. And you see a little kind of clip of their map up on top. There's a great story in the handout of the Jack Levis, the director of operations at that time, really taking a view on the total reduction in cost of fuel, the reduction in labor based on this, and obviously the reduction of carbon emissions as a result of their efficiencies. And so just very important to realize there's such a kind of multi-pronged impact and analysis that you can do in your operations. And then ultimately on the bottom screen we see here is a live fleet tracking with ArcGIS Velocity. And these technologies are no longer kind of the goal of the future, but we're seeing them brought in and incrementally being attached to ongoing everyday operations and building that data set of information that can be analyzed for greater efficiencies and more sophisticated spatial analysis. And finally, the topic we want to talk about today around assessing and adapting that fulfillment network, like now moving fulfillment planning, fulfillment optimization closer to the demand of the market and the demand of the trade markets or trade areas, being less dependent on either store fulfillment, B2B fulfillment from massive decentralized warehouses and distribution centers, but really kind of getting co-located more and thinking about the collection of stores or sites with demand points and fulfillment. And you'll hear Mike talk about trade areas or kind of market areas, and thinking about it as a regional perspective. But we're finding, like, why is that such a big driver today? Right? Like, what's driving this urgency for adjusting and addressing fulfillment needs and evolutions? I refer to a slide like this, kind of ripped from the headlines. Right? These are all recent articles that are really diving into what is this massive shift that's happening in demand kind of behaviors, both B2C and B2B. We're seeing it primarily, aggressively accelerating in B2C, but really what's driving this behavior and need to rethink fulfillment. And this is not a one-time change. This is not a one-time shift to kind of addressing a new fulfillment model. And you'll see we refer to it, and different organizations refer to it as these fulfillment hubs. Like understanding the collective demand across a trade area that includes fulfillment from a variety of different types of orders, online, in person, really supporting this omni-channel shift. And I just can't stress strongly enough that this is not a one-time big update and upheaval, but it's actually going to be trying to address and keep track of rolling shifts of behavior, not at a country or a state level, but being able to do it at a regional level, or what we might even refer to as a trade area level, like how to segment and categorize your different trade areas based on the uniqueness of that trade area, and then organizing fulfillment, in that context. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. And I'm excited about introducing you to Mike Fry. He's had some hands-on experience recently with some different organizations here in the US and beyond, but really can take you into the kind of the brains of how organizations would adopt this mindset inside their organizations. With that, Mike, would you like to take it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. Okay, if you move to the next slide. Okay, so what I'm going to show you today is how we can use the tools in ArcGIS and the capabilities to optimize operations and respond to market shifts quickly with information-driven processes and data-driven processes. So in our scenario today, we are going to take a look at retail locations that sell small to large appliances with tools, maybe kind of lawnmowers, drills, fridges, washers, dryers, those kind of things, and how we can help them with some of their challenges. And the challenge that we're seeing, as Cindy said, is there's really this shift in consumer patterns where people used to shop mostly in stores and make purchases, and we're seeing more of an omni-channel shift where people are shopping online, or really that increased demand for delivery, flexible deliveries, right, when they're home. But that increased demand for delivery, we're getting everything from sandwiches to automobiles delivered to our homes now, and that's going to be probably the norm for the future. So so the current model of having these brick and mortar stores, it's really inefficient in many ways, and one of those is getting supply to multiple stores. We know that there's pain points in the supply chain disruptions, and getting inventory can be a real challenge. And then also, planning for inventory levels and the different models and colors to have in stock into multiple stores within a trade area also presents a lot of challenges and also inefficiencies. So the solution to this, as Cindy said, is really this idea around a central fulfillment hub that can service the entire trade area. And I'm going to show you how we do this using the ArcGIS software. So how are we going to do this? Well, we're really going to take 4 steps. And in the first step, we want to assess our as-is network. What is our current operation? Look at our, what our network looks like and how we're fulfilling. And we can see patterns in that, our customers, our storefronts, our trade area. Step 2, we want to really do some analysis on that trade area. We want to find out, really do some customer profiling, see the behaviors of our customers. Also, what our service coverage is, what can we do to service the entire area in a more efficient manner? And then in the third step, we're going to really start creating those what-if scenarios. So this is an iterative process, that you can kind of fine-tune as you go using the tools. But those what-if scenarios around, if we were to create this new fulfillment center, how would we do that? Where would it be? And then implement that strategy. So whether we're using, dark stores or a brand new fulfillment center, where is the optimal location for that, and how would that look like what would our new network look like in servicing our customers? So now I'm going to go ahead and jump over to the technology itself. And so what we're looking at is the interface with ArcGIS Pro. It's our desktop software. This allows us to run analytics, create and manage data, and this is really the engine behind the GIS software for Esri. So in our scenario, we talked about the 4 steps that we're going to take. In the first step, we want to take a look at our current as-is network operations. So we're going to go ahead and map our trade area. Our trade area is made up of zip codes, and this is could be our trade area, territory, It's really our area of responsibility. Now we want to map, our storefronts in here. So we can see that this is our storefronts. We have a nice, kind of a spread of 5 storefronts here where people can go to buy, our products or order online and have delivery set up from those stores. We also have some really good customer data. So let's go ahead and map our customers, take a look at what the market landscape looks like. So we could see that our customers, have some nice clustering, but we really see that the main body of our customers within our trade area is really within this circle, really nice grouping around our stores. So our coverage looks, pretty nice when it comes to that. So the next thing we want to do is understand what our current network looks like. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and pull off our customers here, and we're going to introduce the idea around demand points. Demand points allow us to really cover all of the zip codes within our trade area. So each of these trade areas have a point. We're going to run some analytics to see, what is the optimal way that we could service our customers using these 5 storefronts. And in doing that, we run some tools called tool called location allocation, which I'll do a little bit deeper dive in as we go forward. But this is our current network. So what this has done has basically taken our location of our brick and mortar stores and says that this store optimally would service these zip codes. Same here, same here, same here, right? So we have these 5 stores that are, in the optimal situation would service those zip codes. We know that in reality, there would be some overlap in these areas, but this would be the optimal way we would service them. And just looking at this, it looks like we have pretty good coverage. But then thinking about the process of getting inventory and product into these stores introduces our first kind of challenge and inefficiency. So as we said, the disruptions in supply chain, getting product on the shelves has been a real challenge, especially over the last couple of years. Getting the optimal level of inventory, product mix into each of these locations presents a really large challenge for companies. And so, if somebody orders a certain model, product, color from this store, perhaps they don't have it in stock. And so then we have to go through and find out where we do have product and get that to the customer. And, if you're lucky enough to have, some mapping capabilities, you could actually map your storefronts, by the inventory level and say, oh, we've got, 10 of them over here. We can bring those in. Most companies, won't have this to start with. So what it really is, you're relying on your employees to call around, find that product, just introducing a lot of inefficiency into that fulfillment. So what we want to do now is really analyze this trade area and see how we can optimize this. We get rid of those inefficiencies, cut the kind of a lot of that fat out of that. So first thing we want to do is, in analyzing our trade area, I'm going to go ahead and shut off our demand points and storefronts here, is understand who our customers are, what their behaviors are. This is really going to help us make an informed decision on how we fulfill to our trade area. So one of the tools that we're going to utilize here is called Enrich. We are enriching the data. So our zip codes right now are empty. They're just boundaries. But what we're going to do is we're going to fill that up with some really great data about our customers, demographics, spending, all kinds of different data. So utilizing the data and tools from our business analyst tool set, we have, some basic demographics, age, population, households. But we also have these great variables around spending and behavioral habits, tapestry segmentation groups that can really give us an idea of who our customers are. So some of these we can just put in, I'm going to put in shop online to see what kind of variables we have. So we have, customers that prefer to shop online. There's online spending variables, or maybe it's around appliances. So I can see, people that have purchased, we'll go down to the household goods here. We can see people that have purchased major appliances, or that the dollars spent on major appliances in those areas. And basically we can fill up those zip codes with this great data. So in this case, I've created an enriched layer that tells us about how these customers prefer to shop. So we can look at spending on some of those appliances we talked about. We could look at, people that prefer to shop online rather than the stores in different manners. And what we find is that looking at our bivariate chart here, in the high to mid area, most of our trade area falls within people that prefer to shop online and people that have shopped online over the last 12 months. We know those numbers are going up, but we can see from this very clearly that most of our trade area relies upon, online shopping. And we can do this with any of those variables, whether it be spending on appliances or even some of the other just demographics around maybe income or populations and those types of things. So understanding how our customers behave is really kind of the first thing. The next thing we want to do is understand if we did create the idea around this centralized fulfillment area, how can we cover that in the most effective way? So using some of the other tools within ArcGIS, namely our network analysis tools, we can run what we call a service area. This is a drive time generated polygon that tells us the reachability from any point out to a certain area based upon proximity. So that could be drive time, drive miles, and it could be by truck, by car, even walking if we wanted to do something like that. But so running this drive time service analysis, I can see by just dropping a central point and running that drive time, this is a 45-minute drive time, that I can cover the bulk of my service area. My trade area where most of my customers are is covered. That tells me within an hour, I could cover the entire thing. So that gives me 1 hour at most drive time from the center of my trade area out to the outer reaches. What this does is tells me that, number one, my farthest reach would be less than an hour, but it also allows me to start thinking about clustering our orders. So instead of trying to fulfill orders from five different storefronts, using this idea of a centralized location allows us to start clustering those orders in a really optimal manner. So, we're using less trucks, we're using less gas, we're getting our deliveries in a scheduled in a way that works better and more efficiently for our company. So now that we've analyzed this, our trade area, let's start talking about where would we put this facility if we were going to do this. So we're moving on to step 3. We're going to add our potential candidates. And as I said, those candidates could be dark stores. Maybe we close down a store and use that just as a central fulfillment, or it's a new kind of fulfillment center. And as Cindy said, these aren't these huge, warehouses. These are small micro facilities that are just meant to service our area. So using the tools in ArcGIS, we can understand which one of these two potentials, it could be more than 2 potential sites, but we want to find the best candidate that meets our requirements. So what we're going to utilize now is the location allocation tool that I talked about. And so this tool allows us to set our metrics for this analysis. So we can import our facilities and our demand points. So let's go ahead and bring back in the idea of those demand points. So when we set those, we can then set any of the parameters around this. So we can, we're going to use drive time. We could use trucking time, trucking distance, as I said, walking, whatever you want to use. We are going to go away from the facility to the demand points. We could do it opposite, and that would tell us, customers driving to our stores, but we're going to do this away. And I'm going to put a 120-minute cutoff, meaning we will never drive more than 2 hours for this, which we know we can already get to our places within an hour. And then we can set some of the other parameters here. One of these is I am only going to choose one of these facilities so that we are setting up a candidate, and it will give us a chosen facility that most meets our requirements. And then we have these different solvers that we can use. And this is the algorithm that is going to push the output for this. So I'm going to do this based upon maximum coverage. I want to cover the whole trade area with the most coverage. But we could do this by capacity. So the capacity for the fulfillment center. We could do, target market shares, maximum market shares. So we have these different solvers that you can run And as I said, this can be iterative. I could run these in different modes to kind of see which one works best for me. But that's really a business decision, but it gives you control of how you run these analyses. The next thing you can do is add time and date to this. So when we're planning for these kind of things, we really like to plan for the worst case scenario. Anybody that knows Southern California, times of day matter when you're trying to move around. So we want to, run these analysis at high traffic volume times. So I ran this at, kind of that 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock traffic in the morning that, is going to give us worst case scenarios so that we have optimized our network with a little bit of contingency built into that. Okay, so when I run this tool, the output tells me which is the candidate that is chosen. So out of the 2 candidates, this candidate is the one that most meets my requirements. As I said, we could have more than 2 on here, but for this scenario, this is the candidate that is the most efficient. Now we can move on to the next step of actually implementing this plan. So, we can set up our, micro fulfillment center here, and we can start, moving product to one location rather than trying to bring inventory into 5 different locations. Now our storefronts can be used more as a showroom where people can, if they do want to come in and take a look, kick the tires, they can see those things. But we are going to fulfill from one center, allowing us more efficiency in the delivery of those goods, in the delivery of the scheduling and timing of those. So the next step would be, that fulfillment, actual fulfillment in operations where we're running, optimized routing and scheduling. And so that is what we have there. And so I'm going to go ahead and recap this. There we go. Okay, so to recap, we did our 4 steps. We assessed our as-is network, our current operations, looking at our storefronts and our current network. The next step, we analyzed our trade area. We looked at our customer profiling for proclivity to shop online, and we can do that in many different ways. We looked at our service coverage. We understand that now within 1 hour from a central location, we can reach any of the customers within our trade area. We created a what-if scenario, bringing in a couple of potential candidates and using some different solvers to kind of figure out which one would be our alternate fulfillment center. And then we can implement that strategy by running that site selection that lets us know that this is the candidate that meets your needs the best, takes the guesswork out of where we're going to go, and then we can implement that strategy and start our operations from our new fulfillment center. And with that, I will turn it over to Cindy.
That was excellent, Mike. Thank you so much. I think you and I both have had personal experience in the last year or so, hoping more organizations are doing this. One thing is that I want to kind of call out here. I mean, we were very deliberate in prescribing this specific trade area, right? But I think you have had experience with national kind of suppliers or national retailers, national, commercial companies that are doing this at a national scale, and or sometimes even beyond the U.S. borders. But I think one of the things to take into account is that organizations don't have to do this in one fell swoop, right? They can. How do you see them prioritizing where and when to implement the strategy?
Yeah, I think, and we just had this conversation yesterday with people around, going from a macro analysis to micro. So running this, running an analysis on, a larger scale nationally, understanding where your pain points are, starting to see patterns of areas where, are more in need of kind of that deeper dive into these. So we usually say, start macro, go micro. So, look at your trade system, your flow of goods from a national level, identify areas of pain, and then go down to these levels of regionality.
I think that's really important to understand, right? We're not prescribing that every single site becomes part of a fulfillment hub environment, but there's definitely going to be those markets that warrant, right? That they either have a high pace of change, or as you mentioned, there's a big shift happening. So a great way to think about it is an incremental strategy or a phased approach, versus believing that you have to kind of rip the tablecloth off all in a one fell swoop. So, but
Yeah.
very good. Thanks, Mike. Excellent representation for sure. So I just want to take a few minutes to wrap us up. And, we're talking about just the push and the requirement for firms to move in this direction. And it may not be kind of one size fits all. In fact, quite the opposite. We believe that whether you're a kind of a services provider, a retailer, consumer packaged goods company going direct to consumer, or a B2B type of organization, your model is going to be very different, and that's why it's so important to understand the kind of flexibility of the tools that Mike showed. And we see three kind of compelling value propositions for this. More and more organizations, as I mentioned, are really shifting their mindset and their focuses around improving that customer service, actually strengthening the engagement between the customer and the company, and having that greater insights for their customer when they're at that point of purchase, online, in person, through a sales representative, having that insight into the availability of good, and making more accurate projections around delivery and fulfillment. Where that might exist to home. Sometimes, I keep seeing these opportunities to fulfill to your garage and things like that, but really having a better kind of agility in serving the customer demand and understanding how that demand is shifting, over time, over a week, over a month, over a season, really important. But ultimately, this also reduces those costs and inefficiencies. And Mike described a really perfect scenario, that stress and wasted cycles in store operations, trying to find the product for somebody sitting in store with you, and you're having to call and source from other locations, and sometimes from other regions altogether. Removing that out of the store. And then the Lowe's article in the Wall Street Journal talked really well about this. But then, as Mike talked about, simplifying that hub inventory, and that hub inventory is going to be very reflective of the market that it's serving, right? So it's not a generic inventory just with kind of a spray and pray hope that it's going to meet your customer demand. And so this as a whole then creates these efficiencies in delivery and grouping and delivery models and things like that. But I call it reduced handling, right? There are less times a product has to move from point to point, from central distribution to fulfillment, to store to user, or from store to store. There's less damage and less human error, less write-off, and you actually can reduce carrying costs, inventory carrying costs, across the board as well. And always near and dear to my heart is if you're rolling less trucks, rolling less deliveries, you're driving down fuel, labor, and carbon emissions, right? So overall, it's just kind of creating a cleaner, less complicated picture of fulfillment and in those trade areas. And then ultimately, what we're seeing as a big byproduct of this is this opportunity to grow into market share or surge into markets when you're more directly attached to the demand points that Mike was pointing out versus the site transactions. It opens up a lens of new behaviors, new buying behaviors that before you might have not been able to see. So really understanding to these micro trends, but you're seeing it from a logistics and fulfillment perspective. And again, you're getting back into participating in more strategic activity with the company versus being an operations center only. But as these demand points grow and trade areas grow in volume and complexity, you could almost see the ability to augment or add hubs incrementally more quickly. To Mike's point, you're not looking for as large a real estate footprint. You're looking for now just this augment of a current model, and just really, really an effective way, I believe, to really surge into that market opportunity. Right. Well, with that, I believe we want to open up the microphone, or at least the question box more. I see some questions in there already, so we can see what questions we have. And Mike, I don't know if you wanted to add anything after the kind of the benefit statement.
No, I think you did a good job of summing that up.
Thank you, Cindy and
So
Mike. Oh yeah, really good content today. I'll look into the questions right now, but I just want to quickly give a note that if you joined us a little late, that there are some handouts that you can download. So before we wrap up today, be sure to get those downloaded so that you don't miss out on them. The first question I did have come in, this one is, I believe, is for you, Mike. When you mentioned the trade areas, how did you define that, and how do you see most companies creating those trade areas today?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we think about trade areas being kind of at that regional level, there's really a process that we go through, and trade areas can be called many things. They're territories, they could be routes, they can be the area of responsibility. But using the kind of tools in ArcGIS, we can do that in many different ways, and it really depends on the company and how they're utilizing it. But so the first thing is using standard geographies, which is what we just talked about. Standard geographies can be zip codes, counties, and grouping those in an optimal way. Within ArcGIS Pro, we have a full set of territory design and balancing tools that can allow users to go in and create territories that they, once again, have full control of the tools to set thresholds on limits on drive times, or maybe they want to capture the most population, or even some of those great demographic variables that we looked at. And they can use those to balance those territories, whether it be zip code, counties, or what have you. Another method is by drive times. So we have certain companies that maybe they are, whether they're doing deliveries of product or services, those can be done by a drive time. So we want to give people a territory or a trade area that is really based upon their drive distances, drive times. So that's another way of doing it. And then we have other companies that are do them through contractual agreements. So we have to really draw kind of custom type boundaries. So there's many different ways to do it, and a lot of it depends upon the kind of business that you have. But we have all of the tools to be able to do that in the most efficient manner in the ArcGIS platform.
Thank you. And then how do you, and someone asked, how do I group deliveries that you mentioned?
Yeah, so in grouping deliveries, scheduling deliveries, this is where we talk about that central fulfillment being able to be the most simplified and efficient way to fulfill orders, make deliveries. But then you actually have to do it, right? You have to plan those and organize those. Well, once again, we have the tools in ArcGIS that allow you to use some of our routing and network analysis tools. One in particular is called our vehicle routing problem, VRP, which allows you to plug in multiple vehicle routing that can be standardized on a schedule and timing to optimize all of those. So in this scenario with a central fulfillment hub, you have hundreds and hundreds of orders. What is the best way to fulfill those given the time, but also the time that the customer requires? That's where the flexibility of those deliveries come in. So in those tools, once again, you have full control of the parameters that you set. So it's not just the most efficient route to customers, but it's also timing. It's also time on site for delivery and setup that allows you to really kick out at the end of the day a multi-stop, multi-vehicle routing problem in the most optimal and most efficient manner.
Thank you. The next question that we got was, how did you do the symbology for the enrichment layer with the two variables?
Yeah, so in the new release of ArcGIS Pro 2.8, we do have the bivariate color symbology available. So that's kind of a newer thing for us, which is really great because in the past, our symbology allowed you to show one variable, whether it be by color or size. This really allows you to add multiple variables, two variables in this case, where you can really get that great bivariate color scheme and really understand the highs and lows within that.
Thank you. And then one of the last ones that we had is kind of talking about carbon footprint. The question was, is there a way to calculate carbon footprint for distribution centers?
And I saw that, Ryan, because it says it's the same person asking two questions, Mike, and it was less about the routing and the mileage, but trying to understand footprint from production to distribution. I'm trying to see the whole question here. For certain commodities. So I think that's, if we simplify it first and say, can we calculate carbon footprint generation and carbon footprint reduction in miles? And we usually can, there's a calculator that we have that you could do that about the miles reduction from one routing model to another routing model, right? Like we could, that's a calculation that could be done. I'm not sure if we have thought about the carbon, or Mike, if you have any experience on the actual distribution center facility, you know, kind of measurement.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a few ways of doing that as well. We have a few different methods to understand the carbon footprints of facilities based upon energy use.
Okay.
Whether they, you know, some of them, like if you're building a new one, do you want, you know, using solar, those kind of things. But for the fulfillment center themselves, and thinking about the idea around those stores, those storefronts, being able to minimize the traffic to and from the storefronts in the beginning. So because you are cutting down deliveries of inventory to each and every one of those stores, and you're using one central location, that provides some efficiency in the carbon footprint in one act, right? We're cutting the amount of vehicles that are delivering to each of those stores. But at the center itself, there's many analyses we can do on carbon footprinting as far as energy usage and those types of things. So if you're using a dark store, so maybe it's a storefront that you've closed, you've now become more efficient in that carbon footprint because you're converting a store from, you know, the lighting and all of those things that goes into the store. It's actually just going to be maintained for the distribution. So, but there's definitely some, you know, some things we can do to calculate that.
I think that's good. I mean, you can almost imagine creating a template of what things you want to compare side by side for like a dark store moving to a fulfillment hub, of kind of closing part of that facility down and the shift to fulfillment hub. I know we worked with a national CPG company that is reevaluating. They're kind of in phase 2 or 3 of this regionalization of their fulfillment, and they were able, just from the mileage perspective as well, because they used to move everything that came in from air, sea, or land into one massive you know, distribution processing, and then back out again to store or home. And the kind of the redundancy or the duplicative routes of driving everything to the facility and then back out again had a significant impact to just overall reduction in the carbon. The last question here, Mike, is because I think we probably kind of ticked a little bit off the tip of the iceberg here. If you don't mind talking a little bit about it, as it relates to that mileage reduction, the carbon related to mileage reduction, or even just first starting with mile reduction. Can you talk a little bit how you would measure that in the system?
Yeah, so we have many customers that are field-based, so they have, you know, thousands of people are out in the field moving around at any given time, and they are using actually tracking vehicles and tracking mileage of vehicles, and they base their efficiency ratings on those. So understanding the true miles that you are undertaking, whether that be, you know, through a GPS or just through calculating from the customer base. So I can take my fulfillment center, I can take the delivery of each and every customer's address and calculate the distance round trip for each of those, and then we can run that against what, you know, maybe some past archives, right? But the the companies that I work with are using, they do it monthly. So they're looking at their fuel consumption, they're looking at the miles traveled by each of their vehicles monthly, and calculating their carbon reduction or their mile reduction in that manner. And some of them are actually finding that that from month to month that may change, and some of those can send up red flags as to why are we why does our miles are not being reduced how we thought in certain areas, and finding that there's maybe some inefficiencies of how those routes were ran, and then being able to run those again through the VRP solvers. But yeah, it really is truly just you can calculate where your customers are and how many round trips you made, or there are companies that are using GPS to actually calculate actual miles that have been traveled.
That's excellent. It makes you appreciate the amount of data that's collected or can be analyzed, that to really understand not just carbon but efficiencies in the system, as long as you're being able to kind of understand what should have happened, like you mentioned, where's the as is versus planned, and then ultimately where the optimization and efficiencies are. So that looks like, go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to say that I think that that's another advantage of using the system is all of the data that that you utilize, and as you're moving along, you are capturing that data and running analytics on, we call them post-mortem analytics. So the advantage is that you are collecting data as you're operating, so that you can run those kind of analytics using some of the really great analysis tools in ArcGIS.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. This was great to have you join us today. And Ryan, I think that's it for questions and our time today.